Thank you for joining us. From our studio in Tokyo, this is NHK Newsline. We start with the United States, where revelations on President Donald Trump's handling of the coronavirus are making waves, with weeks to go until the election. A new book by veteran journalist Bob Woodward says Trump privately acknowledged the extent of the threat to public health as early as February. The Washington Post and CNN have released audio recordings from Woodward's interviews with the president, including one about the virus that took place on March 19th.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic.
Officials had reportedly briefed Trump in detail about the risks of the coronavirus as early as late January. In another interview in February, Trump says he's aware that the new virus is more dangerous than influenza. That contradicts what he was saying publicly at the time. Trump defended himself on Wednesday.
The fact is, I'm a cheerleader for this country. I love our country, and I don't want people to be frightened. I don't want to create panic, as you say, and certainly I'm not going to drive this country or the world into a frenzy.
Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden has been hammering Trump for his handling of the pandemic ahead of the November election. He says Trump, quote, knowingly and willingly lied about the true threat it posed to the country for months. Now, doctors in the U.S. are seeing the number of new cases drop week by week, though they're still treating a lot of patients in parts of the Midwest and the South. And they're concerned about the spread across college campuses and beyond. NHK World's Catherine Kobayashi has more on that.
College students have returned to class, but many haven't learned their lessons. Those at this university in Mississippi are struggling through social distancing 101.
Colleges want to stay open, and just to have such little patience and to have such little restraint that you can't do. I mean, if someone's having a party, don't go.
Many universities have imposed rules on social distancing, masks, and the use of technology to track the spread. Still, thousands have been infected. Their neighbors say students have brought the virus back to college towns.
We've seen this dramatic spike, including in the last month, doubling the number of deaths we've had this year.
Some college administrators have put those who test positive into quarantine in dormitories. Others have sent students back to their hometowns. Doctors fear they could infect their families and their neighbors.
In many ways, we're in much worse shape entering the fall than we were entering the summer. And of course, we know in the fall with schools and colleges opening, we're going to probably see a lot more cases ahead.
Particularly if people continue to gather like this. New York University suspended at least 20 students for violating rules on health and safety.
It's totally contrary to everything you know. We're not acting in a spirit of unity. It's not disciplined, and it's not loving. Violates everything.
Public health experts say what some university administrators are doing is unethical, allowing the virus to spread on campus and off. Catherine Kobayashi, NHK World, New York.
U.S. military officials have announced plans to reduce troop levels in Iraq from 5,200 to 3,000 this month. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany told reporters on Wednesday that the time was right to reduce numbers. She also praised U.S. troops for their success in training Iraqi security forces to help them maintain stability in the country. Calls for the withdrawal of U.S. troops in Iraq have been growing since a U.S. drone strike killed an Iranian general in Baghdad in January. The Iraqi government has been in talks with U.S. officials about reducing their military presence in the country. President Trump, known to support an America First policy, has pledged to bring home U.S. troops stationed abroad. Observers say the president aims to stress his achievements ahead of the presidential election. But there are concerns that a reduction of U.S. troops in the Middle East could destabilize the region. A spokesperson for the Kremlin says he hopes Japan's next prime minister will remain committed to resolving an issue involving Russian-held islands claimed by Japan. Dmitry Peskov's comments were reported by Russia's state-run TASS news agency. Peskov says Prime Minister Abe Shinzo focused on resolving the islands issue through dialogue and signing a peace treaty. His comments come after Abe announced his intention to step down to deal with health issues. Russia controls the islands. Japan claims them. The Japanese government says the islands were illegally occupied after World War II. Japan maintains the islands are an inherent part of Japan's territory. Tokyo and Moscow have yet to sign a peace treaty 75 years after the end of the war, with the territorial issue left unresolved. Russia has been at odds with the West since it annexed the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine 6 years ago. Relations have worsened recently over the suspected poisoning of a leading Russian opposition activist. China's senior diplomat has accused the United States of threatening peace in the South China Sea. Wang Yi was speaking at the foreign ministers' meeting of the East Asia Summit held online. Wang said the U.S. has interfered with the efforts of China and ASEAN member states to resolve disputes through consultation, as well as steering confrontation between countries in the area. He said China hopes countries outside the region, including the U.S., will respect the wishes and expectations of those in the region, instead of creating tension and seeking to profit from it. At the same meeting, Japan's foreign minister said he's concerned that unilateral efforts to change the status quo in the South China Sea have continued. Motegi Toshimitsu urged nations involved, including China and the U.S., to take constructive action to address the situation.
I conveyed Japan's position and concerns to Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and called for a positive response from the Chinese side. I will continue to do so.
Beijing asserts sovereignty over most of the South China Sea. Washington has described that claim as completely unlawful. China and the U.S. have escalated their military activities in the disputed waters. The Chinese government says Australian intelligence officers searched the residences of reporters working for Chinese state media in late June. It said the Australian government has not provided a reasonable explanation for the action. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said the 4 journalists represented state news outlets such as Xinhua News Agency and China Central Television. He said they were questioned by the Australian Security Intelligence Organization and that their laptops and cell phones were seized.
We ask the Australian government to immediately stop such blatant, irrational behaviour and stop harassing and oppressing Chinese personnel in Australia.
The spokesperson also said China has lodged stern protests with the Australian government. The Chinese comments come after 2 Australian reporters were temporarily barred from leaving China this month. They were later allowed to return to Australia. Relations between the 2 countries soured after Australia requested an independent probe into the origins of the coronavirus outbreak earlier this year. Britain says it's held its first talks with all the countries of the Trans-Pacific Partnership to explore joining the Free Trade Group. The UK government called its participation in the meeting a major step toward membership. It added it would enter into a formal accession negotiation with the 11 member states if it decides to apply. International Trade Secretary Elizabeth Truss said in a statement that membership would bring new opportunities for our go-getting businesses. It would also produce more choice for British consumers and provide greater economic security. The UK has been trying to build strong economic ties with countries outside the European Union since it left the bloc in January. Britain is also looking to seal a trade deal with Japan, a leading member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was set to be the biggest ever deal in the global luxury industry. But now, French firm LVMH says it's scrapping plans to buy U.S. jeweler Tiffany for $16 billion. LVMH says France's government asked it to hold off on the deal after Washington threatened to slap taxes on French goods. Headquartered in Paris, LVMH owns designer fashion brands such as Louis Vuitton and Bulgari. It agreed to buy iconic jeweler Tiffany late last year to get a bigger foothold in the U.S. The deal was due to complete this November. But coronavirus lockdowns hit demand for luxury goods, and in June, LVMH said it was reviewing the deal. A legal battle looks like the next step. Tiffany has already filed a lawsuit in the U.S. to try to force the deal to go ahead. Now a check on the world weather with our meteorologist, Setsi Monare. Hello, Setsi. The thick smoke from the wildfires in the U.S. is causing serious health issues for residents and animals. How bad is the situation?
Yes, the situation is quite dire. There's been thousands and thousands of fires, not just recently, but over a long period of time. And just this past week, we have seen more fires burning up and becoming a lot more disastrous for people and animals alike across much of the West Coast states. And it doesn't look like there will be any relief in sight in the immediate future, but maybe towards the weekend as winds come in and temperatures start to cool down. The issue is just that, though, the temperatures are quite high just along much of the West Coast, and also humidity is relatively low. Let's take a look, in fact, at this video where in Oregon, unprecedented wildfires destroyed 5 small towns. Several communities were evacuated, and the first day of school postponed. On Wednesday, 17 new large blazes were reported in the western states. Oregon was one of the hardest hit states in the U.S., where nearly 100 extreme wildfires sort of were sparked there, and you can see the disaster and the damage it has caused along those parts. And like I said, temperatures are fairly high across much of the West, especially towards places such as Seattle, into Portland, going down towards California. There's also temperatures and humidity both hand in hand working together to keep those fires burning along those parts. So if you do notice any of those, make sure you report it as quickly as possible, and also try to find out what your community's evacuation plans are, gather any emergency supplies that you might need, and make sure you keep the smoke outside of your home. That should keep you a little bit safe in the meantime. Otherwise, towards the west, rather the eastern side of Asia, we're seeing the western side of China receiving a little bit more rainfall, but dry weather is coming up towards South Korea and also along the southern part of southeast Russia. For those that are going to be in Japan, do expect a little bit of moisture, some showers come in, and also some lightning can be seen late in the evenings or even in the afternoon. Your temperatures will be quite warm for Tokyo, around 31 degrees. It is expected to cool down a little bit for Ulaanbaatar at 24, and then again, thunder showers right from Manila all the way towards Shanghai. That's all your weather. Take care.
That wraps up this edition of NHK Newsline. Thank you very much for staying with us.